You're supposed to warn me.
I can't wait to see him too.
Yeah, yes, we do. Dr. Zhu, that's right. It's been so long, I can't even remember who's on this thing. It is still there. All right, let's call this thing to order. Welcome to tonight's Technical Advisory Committee meeting for NVTA. Today is the February 21st, 2024. Committee meeting is in person today at the NVTA offices, but due to personal reasons, Mr. Cicerelli is attending the meeting remotely from his home. See him up there on the screen. The summary notes from our November 16th meeting, which I'm sure everybody recalled and has read before the meeting, prep for it. Do we have a motion to approve said meeting notes and minutes?
I'll move.
Do I hear a second? Please, thank you. All in favor? Aye.
Hi.
Any opposed? Hearing none, those are approved. The meeting calendar for, I have that, thank you. Meeting calendar for this year, it's handed out to us. We have any, guess we need a motion to approve this as well. Do I hear a motion to approve?
Motion.
Second? Seconded. All right. Any opposed to approving this? Hearing none, it's approved. Thank you. Mr. Shree, you're up.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Boyce. Thank you, members of the committee. Good to see you all again after a while. Remember the last time you met, you recommended approval of transaction, a long-range plan. We can go to the next slide, please. So the screen you can see to transaction and the meter 6-year program or funding plan. So that's our two primary responsibilities. You did transaction last time. Based on the project list from that transaction, we can then fund projects through 6-year program. The last time we did was 2022, July 2022, when the previous 6-year program was adopted. Go back. Yeah, no, go back. You're going up again.
There we go.
Yes, thank you. So these are the NVTA's vision, goals, and core values that have been adopted in the past. Based on the vision, there are 3 goals: mobility, and accessibility, and resiliency. That's what we want to achieve. And then core values is something that we looked at as how we want to achieve those goals. Those are safety, equity, and sustainability. Next slide, please. I'll not go through in the detail. This is the same thing that you all discussed in the past as part of transaction, how those 3 goals can then be expanded into objectives and then performance measures. And then you all voted to give weights for those measures. As you can see, most of them have 10 points. One of them, the performance measure D1, quality of access to transit and walkable and bikeable environments, that has 15. And the last one, transportation system redundancy, has 5 points. So that all adds up to 100. Core values, yeah, that's fine. Core values, equity, safety, and sustainability. I'm again not going to the details, but equitable population, we want to make sure that they are not adversely impacted by our activities, or they are at least equally getting all the benefits that others are getting. And safety, we want to make sure we are improving the safety and not causing more problems. Same thing with sustainability. We want to reduce the emissions. We want to make sure we are not causing additional troubles for the region. A quick overview of the past 6 programs. When we started it back in 2014, we only had it for 1 year. We took revenue for fiscal year 2014 and used that money for allocating to various projects. The second time we did it, it was a 2-year program. We used the revenues for fiscal year 15 and 16. By that time, we were on to updating our transaction. Now, the previous round that you updated, we adopted in 22, but the one before that, 2017 adoption. So we did 1 year based on the transaction 2040 that was current at that time. Once we updated the transaction in 2017, we truly started the 6-year program. 2018 through 23 was the first 6-year program, which were then followed by 2 more. Now we are into the 3rd one. What I want to focus here is, can you minimize that video window? Yeah. Thank you. So you can see the percentage of approved to the total request. It varied, but on average, you can say it's about 50%. So we usually receive funding requests for double the amount, twice the amount that we usually have for allocating for these projects. That's how it had been the trend. And this time, we received requests close to $1 billion. If you go by the past trends, probably we may have about 500 to 600 million to allocate. So again, we have more funding requests than the revenues we have to allocate. Which means we have to select project. We cannot fund all the projects. So there is a process. Again, most of you are familiar with this. I want to make sure you all refresh into your memory. The primary criteria is the transaction. Yes.
Why is the amount available, amount requested down? Do you have a sense of why that is? It looks like the amount requested is lower than it has been in the past couple of programs.
Well, some of the past programs have very the mega projects that what we call, Richmond Highway BRT, route 1 widening, Fairfax-County Parkway widening, projects like that, which were requesting large amount, a lot more of those kind of projects. This round, now those mega projects are there. So most of the requests are for smaller projects. And I'll come to that, but the kind of mix of projects are also, it's not that big projects, it's smaller projects, like pedestrian transit access kind of projects. So we have less, because the magnitude of the project is small.
Thank you.
So going back to this selection process, eligibility, where the primary criteria is that the project has to be listed in transaction. You adopted the transaction in 2022, it had a project list with 424 projects in that. So when you apply for the funding, this application should be one of those 424 or a mix of one or more of those projects or a subset of one of those projects. The scope has to match with what is in transaction. Location has to be physically in Northern Virginia. And when they submit the application, they have to also submit a governing body resolution from their jurisdiction that clearly identifies these connections and the requested amount and things like that. So we know that the governing body is behind this application, behind this project. Once we do that, once they pass through that criteria, the eligibility criteria, then we take them and do a series of model-based and off-board model-based analysis, other qualitative analysis. So we have a series of quantitative analysis and qualitative analysis. Quantitative analysis, primarily 3 factors we look at. One is congestion reduction related to cost. Again, this is legally required for us to give priority to that measure. It's considered like a benefit cost ratio. Benefit we are looking at here is the congestion reduction that is expected out of that project. So I'll come to that in the next slide. Second factor we look at is transaction rating. Again, you saw that 10 performance measures. We combine them together to come up with a score for each project. Long-term benefit. Monica can correct me if I get it wrong, but as per legislation, the jurisdictions, the members of localities should the benefits of NVTA regional fund investments, transportation investments, that share for each jurisdiction should be approximately equal to the share of revenues they bring onto the table. It's another word, in the long term.
In the long term.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, it says over time.
In the long.
It's very generic.
So
It says over time.
there are many things in it that is not defined. I will come to that also later. So all these things we mostly do through model-based analysis. Nadia is here. If you have questions about model, she will be here to answer all of those questions. Then we look at a series of qualitative considerations where it's not coming from a model kind of analysis. We are looking at what was the past performance of these jurisdictions where NVTA funding, are they moving the projects on time or are they delaying? What is the past performance? Did these projects, this particular project receive funding from NVTA in the past? Is there any funding gaps? If there is gaps, why is there a gap? Will the project move forward? Where will you find our funding? That question comes up. External funding, we always love that you bring a lot of money from outside and we have to only put a small amount and the project can get done. That's great. So we want to know, are you bringing any fund from other sources? This time, since during transaction we adopted core values, we are starting to look at how this project addresses those three core values. This time we are not make it mandatory for them to show us that. We will look into the application and see how it looks. But we requested them, if you want to give us a statement of how this project aligns with each of the three core values, we will look at that. We are still figuring out how that alignment, we are analyzing it and coming up with, that's why it's called a qualitative consideration. We don't have proper numbers to look at it or anything like that. Finally, there will be geographic and model balance. We don't want all the funding to go to one or two jurisdictions or a particular mode. We want to make sure that everybody gets the benefit. Last but not the least, we will have an extensive public engagement and we will take the public comments into consideration before developing staff recommendations. That's overview. Going to the next one, yeah, condition reduction related to cost. I kind of mentioned this a little bit more on this. When we do the model-based analysis, we look at the first two factors we look at is out of those 10 performance measures, person hours of delay reduced in auto and person hours of delay reduced in transit. This we do the model runs for 2 years, 2045, which is the outer year, horizon year, and an intermediate year, which we looked at 2030. So we get two numbers for each project, then we can extrapolate that numbers for the intermediate years and other years. Then we look at when the project is completed or expected to be completed and add up all the benefit from that completion year until 2045. That gives us a cumulative expected condition reduction by that project until 2045. That's the benefit we are looking at. And then we divide that by the total project cost, not the request, but the total project cost, because the benefit we are evaluating is for the whole project. So we divide that total benefit by the project cost to get the CRRC ratio. Next slide. So transaction rating, I already explained, so I'm not going into the details. We only do it for 2045. What is happening in 2045 between no build and build conditions. And for each measures, for each of the 10 measures, we do that for each project, compare them for each measure and see which one got the highest point and which one got the lowest point. And then we divide them by, or standardize, not standardize, what's it? Normalize, thank you. Normalize them by giving 100 points to the best performing project and 0 to the lowest performing. So we can normalize them, the actual scores. Then we use that weight to get to a single score for each project. That's what we call the transaction rate. That means long-term benefit. It's there. I didn't miss. I underline those key terms. Over the long term, it is not defined what over the long term is. Benefit to member jurisdictions That is not defined in the law. Approximately equal to the share of revenues. That is not defined in the law. So in 2014, I think, there was a committee of transportation directors, I think most of them, they met and took up this idea and come up with a policy for the.
A recommendation
But
and the authority adopted principles. We don't
principles.
have policy.
Not a policy, but principles. So we took that principles and tried to figure out a way how we can operationalize this to come up with long-term benefit. The principles said completed projects, but our sample size for the completed projects is not big enough to have a meaningful analysis. So we looked at that, and then we looked at all the projects that we have funded. So far, NVTA has funded 122 projects. So we looked at all of them, their benefits, their congestion reduction. So what is the benefit? We looked at congestion reduction. We looked at it two ways. One is physically where the congestion reduction is happening, so within each jurisdictional boundaries. Second way we looked at is who is actually benefiting the user of the system. So we looked at origins of each of the users and then assigned the congestion reduction experienced by that user to the jurisdiction where that trip originated. So two ways to look at it, by physical location and by origin of the actual user. So that gives us a range of benefits, and then we plot that in a graph against the share of the revenue they brought into the table. That number we know up to the pin. So that's it. If they fall pretty close to each other, we consider that as approximately equal. If the benefit is higher than the share of revenue, we say they are overperforming. They are getting more benefit than the revenue they brought. If it is the other way around, they are underperforming. The note there said the towns are folded up into their respective counties. We don't expect this to be a factor in all the decision making or this to trump all the other analysis in decision making. We expect, and we don't expect this. If there is off balance, we don't expect that to be corrected in one or two cycles. It may take some time for it's not just on our hand. It depends on the kind of applications we will see coming through. Qualitative consideration, obviously you cannot rate that. You have a handouts. I don't know if you picked it or not, but kind of I explained earlier, we look at the funding gap, what is how much fund you are bringing from other sources, external funds, past performance, kind of looking at the project readiness. When is the project ready to start spending money, and when the project will complete, how they align with the core values. We also, authority has a policy. I don't know, there's no name for it. I think policy 29 is what we call it. It essentially looks at making sure that the project moves. Funding is allocated to a project doesn't mean it's just sitting there with the allocation, but it gets into an agreement with NVTA, what we call the SPA, and then it the actual project start moving and start spending. So in different ways, we are looking at how these jurisdictions have been performing in those measures, how they have been doing in the past. So these are all looking at, from the application, we collect those information. Some of the other information comes from the actual data we have in terms of how many projects, how many SPAs have been signed, are they moving or not, things like that. So at the end of the day, we will put all those information into this chart with this format. Next slide, please. We will also have a project description form for each of these applications, which gives a general idea about what this project is, where it is located, what the project scope is, the project milestones, when it will, each phase will start and the end, and what's the project funding from NVTA, from other source, total cost, things like that. And once we have all this analysis done, we will fill in some of those details at the second page, bottom part. You will see the transaction rating, its ranking, CRRC rating and ranking, and so on in that area. So we will have this description form for all the applications. Together, these this chart and the project description form, they give a picture about what this each application is, how they are performing in terms of all these different criteria and compared to each other. So this is what we will go out and present for the public to look at and comment on. Next slide, please. This also is in your packet, I guess, towards the end of the packet. And that shows the current set of applications. We have received 24 applications from 10 applicants. Go to the next slide, please. There's a summary in the second table that shows, or second slide, that shows 10 applicants, total request close to 1 billion. It's all the 4 counties, 5 cities,
Agency.
1 agency. That's it. And from the second table shows that same 24 applications by mode. You can see it's a variety of projects, not any one particular mode is overpopulated there. We have 6 roadway projects, 5 interchange or intersection improvement projects, 1 rail projects, 5 projects that are bus related, 4 projects related to bike and pedestrian improvements, and 3 projects that are technology, ITS projects. Next slide, please. There's a map that also, I think there's a larger print up on the table. It kind of identifies the primary mode of that project. So it is primarily for road or bus or whichever it is. And it's located in approximate location of that project. So you can see the geographic distribution. Next slide, please. Here is this 6-year program schedule. The top part in gray is already completed. We did all the eligibility criteria, reviews, evaluations are almost done. We are filling in these tables that I showed you earlier. We are filling in that now. We will go through that, all those evaluations with you guys and you all and the other committees, PCAC and PPC, in the next month. The authority is expected to approve a date for public hearing at their March meeting. We expect that to happen at the May 9th authority meeting. So usually, even we will have the public hearing first and then the authority goes on to do their regular business meetings.
Will the evaluations be sent to us in advance of that meeting?
Yes. Yes, at the March authority meeting, we are expecting to put all these things to them at the same time. We will send it over to you so you can also take a look and we can discuss it at the March meeting or April meeting too. So as you can see here, April, May is a public comment period we are expecting. May 9th is public hearing. After that, we will put together what the public is saying about these projects. Is there high support for a project or is there a serious opposition against one project? We will put together all that. Based on all these evaluations and the public comment, the staff will prepare a funding recommendation and present to you at your June meeting. Same with other committees also. We present it to all the committees in their June meetings. You can either endorse it as it is, or you can discuss and change, modify, and then make that as your recommendation to the authority. Other committees will do the same thing from their perspective. Authority will consider all that, and we expect them to adopt this program at their July meeting.
Do you expect that anything to do with the proposed sports facilities down on Route 1 will get involved in any of this analysis?
So when we,
Let me just say, not according to the secretary's presentation yesterday, the CTB met and this time, the presentation had been given previously, but this time they had the funding component, which had not been shared. And they said it was the city of Alexandria and the Commonwealth. No mention of us. We shall see. But according to the secretary's presentation, it is the city and the Commonwealth that are backing the arena deal.
I was suggesting though that perhaps some of the travel demands associated with those facilities could impact this analysis.
Absolutely.
so this application deadline was before those announcements happened.
Yeah.
So we received one application from City of Alexandria for a Metroway expansion. It's there, but they want to have, it's dedicated lane ends at Glebe Road, South Glebe Road.
Yeah.
They want to extend it further north. So that is an application for conservation in this cycle. And it will have additional bus stations and things like that, which is in that general area of the arena. But that application was submitted before the
We'll have to
arena
handle that
announcement.
similar to how we handled outside the Beltway 66 and inside the Beltway 66 that just kind of poofed.
Yeah,
out
and
the door.
And the other thing I will say, based on the presentation to the CTV, a lot of their expected traffic is off-peak. It's not commuter-based traffic based on when they anticipate the events will happen. But we shall see. I know they're looking at more funding going into Potomac Yard and things of that nature.
All the events start at 7. That's long. Yeah, there's no tailgating at hockey.
But the reality is, Frank, that is something we would have to look at. Now, on the one hand, and this was similar to HQ2, we had over $200 million, I think close to $270 million invested in that area before we knew about HQ2, because the modeling telling us something of that magnitude was going to come into that area. So while usually we don't know the name at the time we're doing the work, we have some idea of the scale. Now, the General Assembly's in session, who knows what will happen, but, we're watching it the same as everyone else.
I'll just mention that the 10 performance measures we discussed, there is a technical memorandum in your packet towards the end that describes the performance measures methodology, how this is calculated. The primary author of that document probably is Dahlia, performance measures methodology. So if you have any questions, that is here to answer. That's all I have. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any questions for you? Person over there. Jasper.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm just going to take a few minutes to share with you some of the findings of our most recent survey of Northern Virginians' transportation attitudes and priorities. This is a survey that we conduct to get independent, objective insights on a range of topics. And that helps us, when we set a context for the development transaction and our other transportation planning initiatives. It helps us to monitor how well NVTA and the region in general are performing on transportation matters. It helps us to understand the factors that affect quality of life of Northern Virginians and to learn what is important to Northern Virginians. From the survey, we gain insights on how we can enhance our own messaging to Northern Virginians and to promote engagement with NVTA. And I should note that it's not a travel survey as such, but we do explore certain travel behaviors and other behaviors that affect travel in Northern Virginia. We first conducted this survey or a variation of it in 2015, and we called that the benchmark survey. And since then, we've repeated the survey in 2016, 2019, 2021, most recently in 2023. We call these tracking surveys, tracking against the benchmark. But in addition, they obviously give us a snapshot in time. So the one we did during the pandemic was interesting and kind of stood out as being very different to the others. But it also, when we put them together, we get longitudinal trends as well. Sometimes the tracking surveys include new questions, effectively becoming new benchmarks for those questions that could be tracked in subsequent editions of the survey. And in 2023, we added new questions related to bus rapid transit. And we did this because of a new initiative that NVTA has launched to develop a preliminary deployment plan for a regional bus rapid transit system in Northern Virginia. And we kicked off that initiative in like October, November of last year. And I'll talk more about that after this particular agenda item. And so in order to make sure the survey is independent and objective, it's conducted by a member of the consultant team. And for 2023, as was the case for all of the previous 4 surveys, the survey was conducted by Heart and Mind Strategies. You may not have heard of them, but Heart and Mind Strategies is a member of the Cambridge team. And they're based in Reston, but they've got a national reputation for this sort of stuff. You have the full report in your packet. It's 60+ slides. You'll be very relieved to hear that I'm not going to walk you through all 60 slides. There are going to be like 3 slides I'm going to leave out, but no, I'm going to pick on 3 slides.
Mr. Jasper, stop.
I think it was sent out with the email.
Yes.
It was sent out.
I don't think it's not in this.
No, it's not in that packet because it's big and it's colourful and it's paper and you already have it. But we do have a couple here. You can pass those around if anyone wants to follow as I speak. You're more than welcome to take those, but we didn't want to print the whole lot out again for you. But you can follow along. So I'm going to actually talk about 4 slides on this particular agenda item, and then for the BRT, I've got another 4 or 5 slides I'm going to come back to at that point as well, because they're specific to that initiative. So if you could go to slide number 1, actually that's slide number 6. Oh, 8, okay, we can go. Number 1 was the title slide. So 6. These are the kind of like the key findings from the survey. Investing in regional transportation, as you saw from the funding requests that we've received, it remains a priority for our member jurisdictions, and it remains a priority for Northern Virginians as well. It's been fairly consistently high. The feelings towards this, like up in the high 80s, 90% range of Northern Virginians in the survey believe that investing in regional transportation is a priority. Commuter habits are still impacted by the pandemic. We've seen changes over the last 3 cycles in particular, before, during, and kind of after pandemic, at least after, in terms of the danger to life. And COVID is obviously still around, but we're not seeing the travel patterns we saw 2 years ago or 4 years ago, and so that is something that's evolving still. I think it will continue to evolve. We'll probably see something different, next time we do this survey. Safety is always a priority, and I'll come back to this point on an upcoming slide. I'll also come back to the BRT related findings, but just kind of finally, transportation issues. We found this time, and in fact we found for all of the surveys, that people's recall of transportation news is declining compared to when we started this in 2015. We don't entirely know the reasons for that. We have a few theories, as does the consultant, but essentially the bottom line is that the number of people who are recalling something in the news about transportation is declining cycle by cycle. That probably is mostly to do with the way people seek and receive news, but it's also partly to the fact that what's in the news cycle when it comes to transportation. Invariably, metro is the number 1 thing that people recall when it comes to news, but it's a mix of positive and negative feelings about metro. So, but overall, it's on decline. Also, some other aspects of how they feel about things, including NVTA, it's kind of softened. I'll come back to that again. So, if you can jump to slide 14. Okay, so this is quality of life factors. We're showing you here, maybe a little bit difficult to read. If you've got it open in front of you, it's slide 14. The top two factors affecting quality of life in Northern Virginia have consistently been transportation congestion, related transportation matters, and affordability, particularly affordability of housing. Over the years, I think the order has flipped. It used to be congestion, it's now affordability, but they're still both the top two. And we believe firmly that they're interrelated. So it's almost like housing affordability policy is almost a transportation policy. If people have to drive long distances because they can't afford to live close to where they want to be, that means that the further out they go, the less likely to have access to transit, unless they're in a particular rail corridor, which means they're driving, and not only are they driving, they're driving very long distances. So those things are still top two. In this latest cycle, crime has jumped up noticeably. I mean, the consultant flagged this as a significant change. I think in previous history, for this, you've been looking at something in the 7-8% range. Now we have 14% of the sample saying crime is the #1 factor for them, affecting their quality of life. Now, in this survey, we don't drill down to understand what they mean, whether they are victims of crime or have family or friends who are victims of crime, or whether it's a general perception of crime. If it is a perception, is that perception from what's happening in Northern Virginia or the district or in Maryland or somewhere else? We don't know the answers to that. We're going to explore that a little bit more. I'll come to that when I get to the BRT piece. If we go to the final slide I'm going to address in this segment, which is number 52 in the packet. This one is quite satisfying, I would say, from our perspective, and for all of you probably working in transportation in the field, in some way, shape, or form, you're having some influence on this as well. So the top graphic is looking at survey results from 2015 through 2023 for the region as a whole, and then below that for NVTA in particular. And essentially, we're asking how the regional NVTA is performing on planning and implementing transportation solutions. If you look to the right-hand green column, it's headed good, excellent. You see the percentages there for good and excellent, with 27% for the region in 2015, and in 2023, they reached 51%. And in between, it's been a pretty steady upward slope during that time. For NVTA, the corresponding numbers started at 35% in 2015 and now at 59%. So basically, for both the region and NVTA, the majority of people in the survey are saying that the region or NVTA both are doing a good job when it comes to transportation. So it's quite gratifying to see that. Whether it was good or bad, it's important to us to know how we are being perceived in how we do our jobs and how the region is doing its job for transportation. So that was the last thing I wanted to touch on. Before I go on to the BRT stuff, be happy to take any questions there may be, or if you want to look at any other slides, we have them available.
Proceed.
Okay. So can you go back to slide 25? So I mentioned that we initiated last fall an initiative to look at a regional bus rapid transit system, and this is something that really grew out of a transaction. The last thing this committee was involved in endorsing back in November of 2022. And you may recall there was a page or two in there about bus rapid transit and how we flagged that. The reason why we flagged it was, there's clearly a challenge in dealing with congestion and emissions and so on. And if we are to get on a pathway of reducing dependence on driving, particularly driving alone, then there has to be an option. And maybe in the old carrot and stick analogy, something to incentivize people to change their travel behavior, and maybe something to encourage it through other more forceful means like policy. So this is where this all started, and really we're trying to bridge the gap between transaction and our 6-year program by doing some analysis that looks at a regional scale at bus rapid transit, so that those member jurisdictions who are inclined to want to pursue these sorts of projects have a kind of a head start from this work of knowing what a regional system might look like in order to propose components of that on an incremental basis, knowing that when they're all put together, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So that's kind of the thinking behind this. In the survey I mentioned earlier, we did ask for the first time some questions about people's understanding of bus rapid transit. But to set the scene for that, we asked them about what transit initiatives they'd even heard of. It turns out that when it comes to particular things, they knew about Metroway or Potomac Yard Line, which some of you may have ridden on, but is the only operational BRT system in Northern Virginia at the moment. 28% of the sample have heard of that. We asked about, the Richmond Highway, Route 1 BRT, the Better Bus, WMATA's Better Bus Initiative, Envision Route 7, which NVTC is leading through Fairfax, Falls Church, Arlington, Alexandria, other bus system improvements. But the thing that people most heard about was none of the above. And so, that's not to kind of be critical of any of those initiatives, but it is for us to understand where people are when it comes to BRT. So, so the starting point is not much awareness. You want to move on to the next one? So we kind of dissected that a little bit and asked, specifically how familiar you are with BRT and how favourable do you feel about BRT? And we gave them the definition on the left there so they can understand what even BRT was and then react to that statement about what BRT is. And no great surprise that extremely familiar and very familiar was 12% the response. So kind of consistent with the previous slide, not really a whole lot of awareness. But when it came to the favorability of BRT, if it became available in Northern Virginia and they could use it, very favorable and somewhat favorable was more than half the sample. So we thought, well, that's at least people are predisposed to the idea of using it. It's not to say they will use it, but it's a good start, particularly as the biggest response to that question was neutral. So a lot of people were open-minded about it and not committed one way or the other, and a very small number were unfavorable or very unfavorable, which is really good news. So overall, in terms of understanding the benefits, 84% were positive, 16% were negative. In terms of the positives outweighing the negatives. Let me go to the next slide. We asked how people might use BRT. This is also very interesting. For commuting purposes, 54% were thought they might be extremely, very, or somewhat likely to use the system. But for recreation, personal, non-commuting purposes, it was actually higher, it was 63%. So that we thought was very encouraging, given that trip making in Northern Virginia, from a commuting standpoint, it's only about a quarter of the trips are commute trips. So if that percentage are kind of inclined to at least consider it, for non-commute trips, then that's a good kind of compliment commission.
Keith, in getting the attitude question, did you mention at all that BRT might require taking a lane from existing auto traffic lanes?
Well, go back to the definition. Oh, go forward, sorry. Yeah. So a bus-based transit system delivers fast, frequent, reliable service that may include dedicated lanes, busways, or transit signal priority off-board vehicles, etc. So it's mentioned that it might include those things, but not, I mean, we can't say at this stage whether it would mean taking a lane away or adding.
Shows that when you get down to the practicalities of
course,
trying to find the geometry to include the lane, favorability tends to change a bit.
it may well do, yeah. But in the absence of a grand design,
Yeah.
you know, that would be a too detailed question to ask when we're kind of at the benchmark stage. But it's something that we'll flag going forward in the process.
Being the exacting engineer that I am, 32 plus 20 is not 51.
There may be some rounding errors.
The following slide.
When it comes to these posters, you know, it's like math is magical.
Yes, and that slide too has rounding, nothing, yeah.
You know, it's interesting that the TAC committee gives me comments like that and the authority members did not. So I'm not sure what that says about you versus them.
We're being recorded, I'm not gonna say.
Where were we? Okay, so what the factors that people felt would most influence their decision, convenience, travel time savings compared to driving, faster and more reliable trips, were the three that rose to the top of the list. And then you can see some of the other factors there and how that's held out in terms of influence on how they responded to the earlier questions. So I think that's the last slide in this group. So if you just jump to the next slide, well, the next part of this presentation, and it's just a few slides here in the PDP. The PDP, yeah. Sure. So while Ian's loading that, you know, our kind of philosophy here is, you know, to think big, start small, build momentum. So the thinking big part of this is a regional system. To start small, we've already started small, and indeed small is not that small because NVTA has already funded in all 5 BRT systems that are currently in development or operation in Northern Virginia to varying degrees, to a total that's now approaching $500 million. Transaction includes projects that potentially could be eligible for funding by NVTA that are BRT or high capacity transit related, to the tune of about $10 billion. We don't have $10 billion. Say that for one class. But all the more reason why we want to do this, because we want to invest that money wisely, and we want to be sure that when we fund a future request for funding for a BRT line, it fits with the regional system so that we maximize the synergies and the benefits that the region and NVTA will get as a return on its investment. We don't want to invest in 20 BRT lines, which are branded differently, operate in different ways with different vehicles and different formats on different lane configurations, with different fare structures, with lines that cross but don't truly integrate with one another. That's not what we want our money to go on. And so this PDP will both help jurisdictions when they request funding from us, but it'll also ensure that, you know, we will get something that ultimately is greater than some of the parts. So if you want to just flick through, so I think Shree's already covered that. BRT and transaction, I just mentioned a few of those numbers. We are kind of, although in fact I think there are a couple of projects in the current 6-year program cycle which are BRT related, we're really targeting to complete this work in time for the next call for projects that we issue, which would be anticipated for May of 2025. So we're looking to finish this work by about March, at least the bulk of the technical work by March of 2025. So that jurisdictions who want to submit something have this information before they have to kind of commit to requesting funding from us. And obviously, with a 6-year program on a 2-year cycle, it will stand repeatedly beyond the next cycle. And the other thing we always love is that people use our money to leverage for other money, state or federal. So it really stretches our money, our resources to the maximum extent. Giving my catch phrase there, think big, start small, build momentum. There's a little map there, which is what was in transaction in terms of the potential coverage of a BRT or HCT network. These are not lines that we've kind of magically made ourselves. A lot of this is done in collaboration with the member jurisdictions. So they feel there's something there. Remember, transactions looking out to 2045. A lot of these things won't work today. The density thresholds are not high enough yet to be able to do that. But looking forward, we may well see more and more places, more and more corridors where this will work. The PDP, as you see in the last bullet there, is going to look at ridership, congestion reduction, operations, capital operating costs, funding opportunities, governance consideration, and it'll be fully aligned with NVTA's core values of equity, safety, and sustainability. That's the schedule. We're currently in phase 1. The perception survey was done under this umbrella because it added those new BRT questions. We are taking some of the feedback from the perception survey into the next phase of the community engagement and data gathering, which is focus groups. These are scheduled for early March. Focus groups, will give us the opportunity to drill down with a smaller group of people who represent Northern Virginians, but not in a statistically significant way, to get a conversation about things that influence them, things that we can take account of. The focus groups themselves will feed into a fairly major online survey, which will follow later in the spring. At which point we'll be beginning to engage with the business community as well. Something that NVTA does on a kind of a piecemeal basis, but we're trying to be a bit more proactive, coordinated, and comprehensive when it comes to getting a business community input. Obviously, citizens will always be a part of our engagement process, as will advocacy and other interest groups. As we go through, we see phase 2 is going to be where the detailed analysis is done, and then we'll come back. The detailed work will be mostly done by March of 25 in phase 3, but we want to get another round of public engagement on that, and then we'll report out in the latter part of 25. I think that's the last slide. Oh, no, there's some detailed stuff there, which is just related to phase 1. You can see I mentioned task 1.2. We're looking at peer regions around the country. Keeping in mind that Northern Virginia is not a city, we need to kind of look at similar regions that are already developing BRT, particularly to understand what density thresholds are working for them, so we can compare those with similar things in different corridors in Northern Virginia, and a whole host of other features that relate to the BRT systems around the country. 1.3 is the community engagement, which is just mentioned the perception survey, the focus groups, and the online questionnaire. And then this will kind of come back into task 1.4, where we'll begin to define the network in greater detail based on all the feedback we're getting. And then in 1.5, we're going to define a methodology to actually do the analysis going forward, which we'll be heavily involved in.
Yeah.
Good. The 1.6 is an NVTA work session. We haven't scheduled this yet. I anticipate it will be late spring, where we'll get the authority members around a table like this, maybe not this one, but to get their take on BRT, but also give them the benefit of what we've learned in the coming months. I think that's the last one. So,
I think you were finding it instructive to talk to some of the people in Montgomery County who've been working on trying to put together a BRT plan for over 20 years now.
well, you may recall, maybe you don't, we, as part of our transaction work, we did create a BRT planning working group. We wanted to use a group like that already existed, but when we looked, we realized there wasn't one. So we created one, and our BRT working group includes all the folks around the region, around Northern Virginia, you would expect, but in addition, we reached out to Montgomery County, to PG County, to the districts, Maryland, obviously Ramada, NVTC, I'm probably forgetting a few VRE, but because we wanted to have kind of like a broad range of opinions on that. And you quite
I
rightly
mean,
point out,
their
they've been,
experience in trying to go from a plan to actually implementation is very instructive. I mean, 15 years ago, they were convinced they were ready to go to construction on the corridor cities transit plan. And yeah, nothing has been built. But,
well, we do hope to learn from their experiences, and if they've made mistakes, then
And,
I'm sure they'll be gracious
and
enough
some
to
of
tell
the
us.
public input on some of the aspects are also interesting.
We don't pretend it's easy, but we also say, what's the alternative? I don't say Metro Rail, because we know that there will be no new Metro Rail lines in Northern Virginia or in the DC metro area for at least 2 decades, probably 4. We can't wait 4 decades for this region to keep functioning. We've got to give people options. And we think transaction backs this up, that this is one thing that is worthy of our time and effort.
Quickly approaching that 59-minute rule. Any questions for Keith?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I will be quick. A few things that I wanted to share. On the table, when you first came in, it's our 2023 annual report. So it's really, of course, a year in review. We did it a little differently this time. It's not so much of a book that people really weren't taking with them. Please take, got one for you over there, Dr. Rate report, have the QR code, as you see in our presentations, it's in the annual report if you want any additional information about NVTA. Number 2, we are moving. The authority, we are moving. Our March authority meeting will be our last meeting in this space. We're moving about a mile or so away. I'll send the details, but this has been a long time coming. So thank you. We've enjoyed the space. The new space, again, closer to Metro, it's right off the Dunmore Metro Rail Station, but we are moving. General Assembly. So this committee, and thank you and Armand and all of you for coming out tonight. If you recall, the TAC is legislatively a 9-member committee. 6 members are appointed by localities embraced by the authority, and that is the language that's in the law, and I'll circle back to that. And 3 members are appointed by, the law says, the chair of the CTV, which is the Secretary of Transportation. We are 1 member short on the TAC, and we wanted to get clarity on the language regarding the 6 members that are appointed or by localities embraced by the authority. Senator Boyko put in the bill, it's received support, And the clarity comes in, well, is it the localities that get to appoint the members or is it the authority? So the authority, it just clarifies that the authority appoints that member. Assuming the bill passes, as soon as that bill passes, we will try to get the 9th member of this group on to this committee. And lastly, for those of you who haven't heard, some sad news. I don't know who all knew John Mason. He was the former mayor of the city of Fairfax. He was actually interim executive director for NVTA when we didn't have money in 2007. And for a brief period in 2013, when HB 2313 passed, he passed away. His services, I believe, are next Saturday. But John will definitely be missed. He was really a titan and definitely a champion for transportation. So, Mr. Chairman, that's all I have.
Thank you. Unless there's any other comments to be made? Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry to go back to a previous topic. I didn't notice this before. One of the meetings is on a federal and state holiday. Do we still meet? It's the June 19th meeting. Did not notice it when we were on that agenda item.
Is that Juneteenth?
Yeah.
Yeah, we won't be meeting.
That is a big meeting.
Yeah.
Well,
Just
And a
look
big
and
holiday.
see. Yeah, just,
We need to meet in June, obviously, so then
we can,
let's go back and look at some alternate dates.
we'll discuss with you.
it was
all.
passed with the exception of that date.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it also says the March meeting is gonna be virtual.
Well, yeah, you can, when did that happen? In 2020, 2021, the bill passed. You can meet in person 1 month, then the next month virtual, but you can't have 2 consecutive virtual meetings.
That's part of the move, that's also, office move we are talking.
Would be here.
Oh, no, I said the authorities March meeting will be
Oh,
here.
We're in the
But then,
TAC.
yeah. So, but that's the last, we're moving that following week. We're gonna start
Yeah,
our
this
move.
won't be here,
Yeah.
so.
Yes.
Okay.
We were concerned we might still be on boxes and we couldn't find the appropriate laptop to. We figured we would be safer to do it remotely. But it does mean that the April meeting has to be in person.
Yep.
At a new location or somewhere that works.
My baby. Okay, any other questions? Armand? Gone. There is. No question. Okay, seconded somewhere. I heard it. We're adjourned.
Thank you.